Well, I enjoy doing these morning walks. It's gotten to be where it's kind of therapeutic to me. I certainly need to walk more. Having said that, I also like carrying a camera with me, and sometimes with photography you don't really know what you're going to photograph. Like, you feel like you've run out of subject matter. But the thing about walking your neighborhood with a camera is it kind of forces you to have to take photos that you like, regardless of whether you think they're going to be good or pleasing or whatever to somebody else. And I found, as I review the pictures I take in the neighborhood, often weeks or even months later, I start to see things about the neighborhood that I wouldn't notice normally. And I think it's pretty cool having that recognition of the fact that there is an aesthetic about the neighborhood, about living in a suburban area, and it can be the subject of your photography. You can make it the subject of your work, for instance. Like, you don't necessarily have to go to some place exotic. The whole thing about photography is finding things that are interesting, visually interesting, and they kind of tell a story. And this neighborhood was built in the early 1960s, and it certainly has a history of its own. And it's aged, it's gone through several generations of people, and so it's kind of fun to take pictures of your domestic situation, your neighborhood, and then try to look for maybe some kind of patterns or themes, recurring kinds of images or subject matters, and that's what I've enjoyed doing. I have 3 digital cameras that I have been using on neighborhood walks, and I usually just let them go for weeks or even months, and then eventually I get around to transferring the files to my computer and working on the pictures and culling out the good ones. So it's sort of time for that. Okay, so the camera that I have been spending a lot of time using is this little Canon Rebel T5i with a 24mm lens. And the thing I like about the digital SLR is, looking through the viewfinder, it's an optical picture. It's optically coupled through the lens. And the autofocus is really, really fast. I have it set up for one little X, a little red LED X in the middle of the picture. You put that on whatever you want to be focused on, half press the button, well, heck, and it takes the picture very fast, very accurate autofocus. I like it mainly, as I said, because of the optical viewfinder. In bright daylight, you can see the world out there optically, and the response is really, really the best of any kind of a camera, because the picture you're seeing in your eye is live. Then we have this little beauty. This is the Ricoh GR3. It is a very pocketable camera, extremely pocketable camera. I tend to use this camera more in the winter time because it's pocketable. As you can see, when it's turned off, the lens is collapsed, it's very small, but it fits better in a jacket pocket. And I don't wear jackets in the summertime, so in the summertime I prefer to wear a camera bandolero style around my shoulders, and in the winter this is a great camera. The sensor on this is very sharp. The sensor and the lens are very sharp, but it's a fixed focal length 28mm equivalent angle of view. So there's pictures on the memory cards of both these cameras for the last maybe up to 6 months, maybe, I don't know. Well, then we have this little camera that I've been taking on morning walks. This is the Panasonic Lumix G5. This was one of the older cameras in the G series, Micro Four Thirds. And you know, Panasonic started out, the Micro Four Thirds cameras were actually rather small, but as it turns out, later on they've gotten a lot bigger. This one, though, I'm using a little, what you might call a body cap lens. This is a 7 Artisan 18mm f6.3 fixed aperture body cap lens. Very small manual focus lens that I was interested in trying out for street photography, because the camera now is extremely small with this little lens. Yet the camera not only has a flippy LCD screen, but it also has an electronic viewfinder and a built-in flash. So a lot of capability built into these small cameras. So I had fun shooting this camera out with this little lens, but I got to tell you, this little lens is not the sharpest lens in the drawer. I think my sharpest Micro Four Thirds lens is probably going to be this Panasonic Leica Sumilux 15mm f 1.7. This is a stellar lens, and I have been using it also on walks, but this go round I didn't use the Panasonic Leica lens. I used this little 7 Artisans manual focus lens. And so I'm going to take the memory cards of all 3 of these cameras, import the footage into my hard drive. I have a separate folder for each camera. I'm going to go through all these pictures. I'm going to cull out the ones that I really like the best, and I'll process them, and then we'll do a little slideshow, and I'll kind of talk about the subject matter of shooting pictures around your neighborhood. Okay, the Canon T5i, memory card. Select them and drag them into the hard drive. Well, I'm just starting to go through with the Canon T5i photos. So these were taken back in April. I take a morning walk, and I remember taking these photos, and this thing that interests me was we have these southwestern adobe style houses in our neighborhood, and this stuccoed wall has the shadow of the tree from across the street shining on it. And I've always liked shadows. Oh yeah, and the flood control channels divert floodwaters coming down off the Sandia Mountains. So we had obviously some rain recently since this picture was taken. This is up on Wantabo Boulevard. Anyways, I'm just going to scan through these pictures and see which ones I like. Okay, let's see. I'm going to raise the shadows, drop the highlights, and raise the black point slightly. Then I like to put a little vignette, a little too much, not quite that much, like that. And that's pretty good. I always like to look at it in black and white just to see how it looks to me. Does it work without color, or is the color part of it? The blue sky and the tan stucco back here. There's little orange highlights on these bricks. There's orange highlights on the poppies. I don't know if that's part of the image. That might be interesting. We'll have to work with that. So a lot of these pictures kind of interest me because I kind of like the new topographic style of photography, and I'm not so sure yet how this picture is going to go. I like the carport, the trunk of this Cadillac sticking out from behind the house, the mailbox in the sun right in front of the shaded porch. And the shaded porch kind of also references Gary Winogrand's photo of New Mexico, 1957. I think this picture could perhaps work a little bit better at a 16:9 aspect ratio. I don't want to lose too much of the dark shadows. I want to keep the dark shadows kind of dense. I don't want the highlights to be super blown out. Drop the exposure a wee bit. Not sure about vignetting. I like to add a little bit sometimes, just barely a little bit. And then if I raise the black point, I think right about there is not too bad. Now, does the color information add to it? The fact that we see a lot of brown buildings in New Mexico, a lot of blue sky, so this kind of color combination is very common. I don't know. I think it works better black and white wise. I think I'm going to adjust the cropping and get a little bit less sky up in the corner here. A little bit more foreground. Something like that. All right. Well, so now we are into the Panasonic camera images, and this particular image I'm not really sure about. I kind of like the black and white rendering here. On the other hand, going back to the color rendering, there's a little bit more clarity to the image. You can see a little bit more the dark bluish shadows, the morning shadows, and then the warm tones where the sun's hitting. It just seems like it gives you more information, whereas the black and white image is more abstract, obviously. And I'm not really sure if these tumbleweeds that are washed down this flood control channel, they're not as visible. Things aren't as easy to see here in black and white, and yet I like the black and white. So I'm kind of torn. I haven't really decided yet. Okay, so here is a slideshow of some of the pictures. This is the Panasonic Lumix G5 with a little pancake manual focus lens. This picture, I cropped it to square, and I always like light pole art. It kind of fascinates me. And I wanted to make sure I got the apartment complexes along the right edge and the left edge here. This is kind of indicative of a lot of the kind of little restaurants and cafes that we have in Albuquerque. Very brightly painted, and I like the 16 by 9 kind of aspect ratio. Gives it that kind of landscapey appearance. My gym, there's a guy getting out of his truck at the gym. This is a typical Albuquerque with weeds growing and a cannabis dispensary in the background, which is very much a thing now in Albuquerque. Kind of an interesting image. The Cancun Splash Car Wash, which I do kind of like. And next, I like this back alley, this massage sign, kind of urban, formalistic composition. These kind of things I really like. Walking a lot of alleyways and sidewalks in the urban areas. These kind of pictures kind of interest me. And here is the shopping center where the Harbor Freight tools are, and this yellow light pole that's kind of leaning over. It's kind of very interesting. It kind of reminds me of a lot of the other urban shopping centers that are kind of in decline. They've seen better days. Shadows of a pine tree against a stucco wall. This is up near Garcia's Mexican Food. This is a local chain, and I just like the colorful sign and the big pancake and bacon picture in contrast with the suburban landscape behind it. And I finally decided on this picture that I would go with the black and white rendering. I did a square format on it. Yeah, it's typical of after a rainstorm. The floodwaters come rushing down from the Sandia foothills and washes a lot of debris down in these flood control channels, and that's what I've observed growing up here a lot. This is a common sight in Albuquerque. And then this is another neighborhood, colorful, flowery mailbox. I cropped this to square format. These are the kind of things I observe when I'm walking the sidewalks in my morning walk with a camera strung around my neck or in my pocket. And I closed on this particular image. And again, it's kind of reminiscent of a theme here of curb couches. In this case, it is a box spring mattress flipped upside down on the frontage road. It's kind of interesting. And then there is a bluish soda can in the foreground and then a bluish recycle bin in the background. These are recycled trash bins in an apartment complex, and the morning light and the deep shadows from the trees. These kind of scenes I really like. So this is the Ricoh GR3 images. I only finalized 6 of the images out of all the ones I recorded. I think the problem is the GR3 doesn't have an eye-level viewfinder, so in the bright light, it's easy for the back screen to get washed out, and consequently, the compositions aren't always what I like them to be. So, starting with this, I like this picture because of the white picket fence, the nice shadows of the trees on the fence, and then there's a white truck next to it, and then across the street on the right side is a white stucco house. So this is a sidewalk with weeds, I guess it's wild grass growing up along the edge of the curb, and I like the morning shadows cutting across the sidewalk. And I decided it looked better in black and white, so there you go. There's a black and white shot, kind of like it. And this is another curb couch. This is actually a corner unit of a couch sofa setup. I was going to do this in black and white, but I really decided it needed to be color because you have the lilac bush on the far left, and then you have the main house is a lighter shade of tan, and then the darker shade of brown to the right of it, and then this brownish sofa. So it's just a lot of interesting colors
So this is at a haircut place, just an interesting combination of shapes and colors, and it definitely works better as a colored image, I thought. And then this is a bus stop, and the trash can and the lawyer advertisement, which is reminiscent of that television series called Better Call Saul. In fact, One Call, That's All kind of rhymes with Better Call Saul. So I think those two lawyers are definitely taking advantage of the popularity of that TV series. Okay, so this is a slideshow of all the images that I saved off of the Canon T5i. So we'll start with this one. This is the morning light falling, the shadows of the tree falling on the front of this white house with the tan house and the red van next to it. I like this shot. It's very reminiscent of the kind of morning pictures that I encounter in my walks. This is my friend Ethan at his shop. He's hard at work thinking, as he always does. This is Ethan's friend Gerson, who is quite a skilled photographer. In fact, Gerson is signing one of his books. I really feel fortunate to know him. I like this morning light of the brightly lit house peeking through this gap in the foliage. Kind of looks more rural than it actually is, but that's the power of photography, is you get to select where the frame lines are. It's a nice little suburban morning light image. Here is a house, an older house in disrepair. It's probably abandoned, and this brick wall is collapsed and fallen over and has had some questionable tenants, and now it's needing some major upkeep. Kind of reminiscent of older neighborhoods are in cities like Albuquerque. So this image is kind of reminiscent of what I call the new topographics style of photography, trying to look at the way civilization intersects with the landscape. I like the back of the Cadillac sticking out from the side of the house in the sun. And keeping with our theme of curb couches, here's a classic one. Curb couch and a bunch of blue storage totes in the background. This particular house in my neighborhood, there's always something interesting in the yard or the driveway. This was a quick shot I took on my walk. I decided to crop it sort of at an angle like this. It sort of accentuates the missing sign that's been taped to the light pole. And also the skewed angle maybe gives it a little bit more tension in terms of the subject matter of the sign. And another house, a flat roof, Adobe style house with this lovely probably early 1960s or some kind of 1960s van. This looks like the kind of van that television repair shops would have used back in the 60s and 70s. And another yard with some interesting clutter, this RV with all the things around it. Another interesting thing to find on your morning walk with a camera at hand. I like this picture, and no, I'm not enough of a gardener to know which plants those are. But some of you guys will let me know in the comments below. And yet more curb couches, this time in the corner of the parking lot of an auto mechanic shop, which makes it even more fun. And finally, not a curb couch, but a curb chair with a footstool, an ottoman, keeping with the theme of curb couches. Well, this is certainly not world-class photography, nor am I representing it as such. But I do want to inspire you to go out, whatever camera you have, whether it's your phone or some little simple camera like this, go out on a regular basis, take your walks, enjoy the fresh air and the exercise, document the world around you in pictures, because it's important for us and for those that we leave behind once we go, to have a record, a visual record of what our world was like, what our communities were like. And I think it's very important to do this. And also that photography is a skill, and it's something that you have to practice in order to get skilled at and to get good at. And you can't practice it unless you go out there every day and take some pictures. Maybe sit on the pictures for a while, like I often do. I let them marinate for a while, so I go back to them and their context has changed from the immediate past to something a little bit further in the past, and I can think about the meaning a little bit differently. Whatever your working method is, you don't have to spend a lot of money on gear or even software. The main thing is to do it on a regular basis, practice it, practice editing your pictures, making those decisions about what's the cropping like, what's the shape of the image, should it be black and white or color, what's the main theme, what's the subject matter, what is it alluding to. All those things you kind of learn, and also become a student of photography. Understand some of the great movements in the 20th century in photography, and maybe figure out if some of your pictures are starting to resemble some of those styles, because then you can work on that more purposefully. I wish you the very best in your creative pursuits. Have yourselves a great day, and bye-bye for now.